Blind date disaster. The poor mechanic sat at the wrong table and met the CEO's paralyzed daughter. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. He wasn't the kind of man who belonged in fancy places. The smell of motor oil clung to his hands no matter how many times he washed them, and the calluses on his palms were reminders of every car he'd fixed, every sleepless night spent under a hood. That night, he walked into the most expensive restaurant in town, wearing his only clean shirt and a borrowed jacket. He checked the message on his old phone one last time. Table 7, 7 p.m. Her name's Lily. He'd never been on a blind date before. His best friend at the garage set it up, saying he needed to meet someone nice for once. Nervous but hopeful, he scanned the room, dim lights, soft jazz, couples whispering over wine. He saw a woman sitting alone at table 7, dressed elegantly, her face framed by waves of dark hair. Her beauty caught him off guard. He took a deep breath, walked over, and said softly, "Hi, are you Lily?" She looked up, startled. There was a flicker of confusion, then a chill in her tone. "You must be mistaken," she replied. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, and her eyes, sharp and distant, studied him like he didn't belong there. He hesitated, glancing at his phone again. "Oh, I'm sorry, maybe I'd—" But before he could finish, the waiter approached, calling out, "Miss, your guest has arrived." She froze, then turned her gaze back to him, suspicion crossing her face. In that moment, he noticed something else. The wheelchair beside her, almost hidden by the tablecloth. His heart skipped. He hadn't noticed it before. She caught his stare and her expression hardened. "So this is some kind of joke?" she said bitterly. "Did my father send you?" He was stunned. "No, ma'am. I think I'm just at the wrong table." But his words only deepened her anger. "You people think I don't see through your pity? Sitting here, pretending to be interested because of my condition?" The words cut deep. People in the restaurant began to glance over. He felt the heat rise to his face, not from shame, but from confusion. He opened his mouth to explain, but she'd already turned away, eyes glistening with restrained tears. A silence stretched between them, thick with misunderstanding. Just as he was about to leave, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression changed completely. "Wait," she whispered. "You're not." But he'd already walked off, embarrassed, heart-pounding, wishing he'd never agreed to this setup. Outside, the cold night air hit him hard. He pulled his jacket tighter, staring back through the restaurant window where she sat, her head bowed, the waiter standing awkwardly beside her. Inside, she realized something she hadn't expected. The real blind date hadn't even arrived yet. The man she just yelled at was a complete stranger, yet somehow she couldn't get his face out of her mind. The sincerity in his eyes, the way he didn't fight back when she lashed out, it haunted her long after he left. And that was how destiny began, not with love at first sight, but with a mistake that neither of them would forget. The night after the blind date disaster, the mechanic could not get her face out of his mind. He replayed every second in his head, wondering how such a simple mistake had turned into humiliation. The next morning, he was back at the small garage where he worked, tightening bolts under the hood of an old pickup. His coworker laughed when he told the story. "Man, you sat at the wrong table? In that kind of restaurant?" The mechanic forced a smile but said nothing. He just wanted to forget it. But every time he wiped grease off his hands, he remembered the way she had looked at him, like she had built walls so high that even kindness could not climb over them. Meanwhile, across town, the CEO's daughter sat in her therapy room surrounded by mirrors and silence. She tried to focus on her leg exercises, but her thoughts kept drifting to that stranger with honest eyes. For years, she had only seen pity or discomfort in people's faces when they spoke to her. But his eyes had something else: confusion, maybe pain, but never pity. That difference bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Her caretaker asked if she was all right. She smiled faintly and said she was fine, but deep down, she knew something about that encounter had shifted inside her. That afternoon, rain began to fall over the city. The mechanic was called out on a service job. A black luxury car had broken down near the corporate district. He wiped his hands, grabbed his toolkit, and drove through the drizzle in his old truck. When he arrived, he saw the car parked beside a glass building, hazard lights blinking. And there she was inside the car, looking down at her phone, completely unaware that fate was about to embarrass them both again. He hesitated for a second. He almost drove away, but professionalism pulled him back. He knocked on the window gently. She looked up, surprised. Recognition flickered in her eyes. He removed his cap, awkwardly polite. "Ma'am, I am here to check your engine." Her pride told her to look away, but something stopped her. She opened the window slowly. "You again," she said softly, not with anger but disbelief. He nodded, his tone humble. "Yes, ma'am, just doing my job." The rain tapped gently on the windshield as he opened the hood and leaned inside. She watched him work his focus, the calm in his movements, the quiet dignity that had no trace of resentment. For the first time, she saw him as more than a stranger from a mistake. When he finished, he closed the hood and said, "It should start now. Just avoid deep puddles tonight." She thanked him, her voice quieter than before. He nodded and turned to leave, but she called after him, "Wait, what is your name?" He stopped, slightly startled. "Ethan," he replied. She smiled faintly. "Thank you, Ethan." He tipped his cap and walked back to his truck, rain dripping down his jacket. As he drove off, he felt something unfamiliar peace, not the kind that comes from success, but from being seen, even if only for a moment. Back in her car, she whispered his name under her breath, realizing that sometimes the wrong table can lead to the right person. She did not know it yet, but their paths were now quietly intertwined, bound by chance, pride, and an unspoken longing that neither of them was ready to face. Days passed after their second encounter, yet neither Ethan nor the woman could shake the memory of that rainy evening. Her name was Emma, and she was not used to thinking about strangers. But something about the mechanic's calm eyes kept returning to her mind, especially when she sat alone in her therapy sessions or stared at her reflection, trapped between who she once was and who she had become. Emma had spent most of her 20s being defined by her last name Collins, the daughter of one of the wealthiest CEOs in the city. After the accident that left her paralyzed from the waist down, her father became even more protective, surrounding her with assistants, therapists, and constant reminders that she was fragile. Yet deep inside, Emma was not fragile. She was angry, lonely, and tired of being treated like glass. That night, she searched her father's company database and found a small note. Ethan Miller, contracted mechanic, Blue Ridge Auto Repair. She read it several times, then smiled faintly. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe she just wanted to feel something real again. The next morning, she asked her caretaker to drive her to a small garage outside town. When they arrived, Ethan was bent over an old Ford, sleeves rolled up, grease on his hands. He looked up in surprise as her car stopped in front of the garage. Emma rolled down her window. "I need help with my classic car," she said, her tone steady. "It is an old model, and I heard you are good with engines." Ethan hesitated, wiping his hands on a rag. "Of course, ma'am. I would be happy to take a look." He did not mention their previous encounters, and she appreciated that. Over the next few days, Ethan worked on her car, and Emma visited the garage often. At first, their conversations were short and polite, but slowly, something shifted. She began to ask about his work, his life, and why he still fixed cars when newer, easier jobs existed. Ethan shrugged. "Engines make sense to me," he said. "When they break, you can see the problem, fix it, and hear them breathe again. People are not like that." Emma smiled at his simplicity. For the first time in years, someone was not talking to her like a patient or a problem to solve. Instead, he talked to her like a person. She told him about her accident, how she used to dance before the crash, and how silence became her new music. He listened quietly, not interrupting, not offering pity, just listening. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Emma watched him working under the orange light of the setting Sunday. His silhouette looked peaceful, strong, and human in a way that felt grounding. She realized that maybe strength did not mean walking it, meant standing tall in one's own way. When he finished, he handed her the car keys and said softly, "It is ready." She smiled, taking them from his hand. "You did not have to work so late." He shrugged again, smiling faintly. "I do not mind. It is quiet here at night." Their eyes met briefly, the air thick with something neither of them could name. That night, back in her room, Emma looked out the window, thinking about Ethan's words, his calm patience, his quiet respect. For the first time since the accident, she felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest, not pity, not sympathy, but something that felt dangerously close to hope. She did not know where it would lead. But one thing was certain: Ethan Miller was no longer just a stranger from a wrong table. He was becoming a part of her story. Emma continued visiting Ethan's small garage under the excuse of fine-tuning her vintage car, but the truth was more complicated than that. She found peace there, away from the cold marble floors and sterile halls of her father's mansion. In that modest workshop, where the scent of oil mixed with dust and old metal, she felt strangely alive. Ethan treated her no differently than he treated anyone else. He opened doors when necessary, but he never hovered, never looked at her with that helpless sympathy she had grown to hate. One afternoon, as Ethan worked beneath her car, Emma watched quietly from her wheelchair. She noticed the way his brow furrowed when he focused, the way his rough hands moved with precision, and the small smile that appeared whenever the engine responded to his touch. "You really love what you do," she said suddenly. Ethan looked up, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "Engines do not lie," he replied. "If they work, they work. If they fail, you fix them. People are not that simple." Emma nodded slowly. "No, they are not." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, unexpectedly, Ethan asked, "Do you miss dancing?" She looked at him in surprise. No one had dared to ask that question in years. "Every day," she admitted softly. "But sometimes I think I miss the feeling of being seen more than the dancing itself." Ethan paused, leaning on the workbench. "You are still seen," he said quietly. "Maybe not by the people you expect, but you are." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She turned her gaze away, pretending to adjust her gloves. That night, back home, she found herself humming an old tune she used to dance to. Her caretaker noticed and smiled, but Emma only said, "It is nothing." Yet she could not deny that Ethan's words had stirred something inside her that had long been dormant. Over the next few weeks, she brought him small things: a thermos of coffee, a new set of tools she claimed her father's company was discarding. Ethan always thanked her, though she could tell he was uncomfortable with gifts. One rainy evening, lightning flashed across the sky as the power in the garage flickered. Emma sat inside her car while Ethan replaced a spark plug. Suddenly, a loud crack of thunder made her flinch, and without thinking, he rushed to her side, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It is all right," he said gently. The warmth of his hand and the steadiness of his voice made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in years. For a brief moment, the world outside disappeared: the rain, the thunder, the past. There was only the soft hum of an engine and the heartbeat of something new. When the storm passed, she looked at him and said, "Thank you, Ethan." He smiled slightly, his voice calm. "You do not have to thank me." But she did. Because in that simple gesture, he had reminded her that she was still human, still capable of feeling warmth, of being touched without pity. Later that week, Emma's father, Richard Collins, noticed her unusual happiness. He questioned her caretaker, who mentioned her frequent trips to a mechanic's garage. The CEO's face darkened. In his world, status and reputation were everything. "A mechanic?" he muttered, disbelief turning to anger. "She is wasting her time." Without telling her, he ordered one of his employees to investigate Ethan. What he found would soon lead to the most painful confrontation in both their lives. But for now, Emma remained blissfully unaware, holding on to the fragile joy that had begun to mend her broken spirit. Richard Collins was a man who had built his empire from control. He believed that everything could be managed, from business deals to people's emotions, including his daughter's future. When his investigator brought him the report about Ethan Miller, the poor mechanic who had been spending time with Emma, Richard's patience ran thin. The report listed Ethan's modest background, his mother's medical bills, and his history of small jobs. To Richard, that was all he needed to see. "A man like that," he said coldly, "has no place near my daughter." That evening, when Emma returned home from the garage, she found her father waiting in his office. He stood by the large window overlooking the city, his voice calm but sharp. "Emma, we need to talk." She wheeled herself in, sensing the storm behind his tone. "Is it about work?" she asked cautiously. "No," he replied. "It is about that mechanic." The room fell silent. Emma's fingers tightened on the armrest. "Ethan?" she said, her voice low. "What about him?" Richard turned to face her. "Do not play innocent. I know you have been visiting him. I had you followed." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You did what?" "It is my duty to protect you," he said sternly. "That man is not from our world. He is after something, and I will not allow you to be another one of his mistakes." "You do not know him," she snapped. "He is not like that." Richard's face hardened. "You think because he is kind, he is safe? That is exactly what men like him use. Sympathy. They find weakness and call it love." Emma's voice trembled, not from fear but from fury. "You think everyone without money is after yours. That is your sickness, not his." Richard slammed his hand on the desk. "Enough. I am forbidding you from seeing him again." The words hit like a blade. Emma stared at him, her chest tightening. "You cannot control who I speak to," she whispered. "I am not your company to manage." She turned her wheelchair toward the door, but Richard added coldly, "If you step foot in that garage again, I will have him fired from every contract in this city. He will not work again." Emma stopped. Her heart pounded as the weight of his threat sank in. Slowly, she turned back, her eyes wet but steady. "You always said you built everything from nothing," she said quietly. "So why are you so afraid of someone who has nothing?" Without waiting for his reply, she left the room, the sound of her wheels echoing against the marble floor. That night, she sat by her window, staring at the rain that seemed to fall harder than usual. She thought about Ethan's smile, his quiet humility, and how unfair it was that goodness could be punished simply for not being born rich. Meanwhile, at the garage, Ethan sensed something was wrong. A black car had stopped outside earlier, and two men in suits had watched him for several minutes before driving away. He did not know who they were, but the uneasy feeling in his chest told him this had something to do with her. The next morning, he found an envelope under the garage door. Inside was a check, large enough to pay off his mother's hospital bills twice over, and a note that said, "Walk away. Do not contact her again." Ethan stared at it for a long time, anger slowly rising behind his calm expression. He tore the check in half, then again, until the pieces scattered to the floor like snow. He looked toward the city skyline and whispered, "Mr. Collins, you cannot buy my silence." Little did he know, Emma had already made up her mind. The next time they met would not be by chance. It would be her defiance against the world her father built. The next morning, Emma woke up with a decision heavy in her chest. She had barely slept, her father's words echoing in her mind like thunder. The threat to destroy Ethan's life was cruel, but the idea of losing him without saying a word felt even worse. She had spent years letting her father control her world, but for the first time she wanted to take it back. She dressed simply, refusing the help of her caretaker, and called for a cab instead of the family driver. When the cab stopped in front of the small garage, she saw Ethan working on a truck, his sleeves rolled up, sunlight catching the sweat on his arms. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure if she should disturb him after what had happened. But before she could lose her courage, he looked up and saw her. Surprise crossed his face, then softened into concern. "Emma," he said quietly, wiping his hands, "you should not be here." She wheeled closer, her voice steady but trembling slightly. "I know about the check." Ethan's expression darkened. "You should not have to deal with that. It was not your fault." "It was my father," she said softly. "He is trying to scare you away," Ethan sighed, glancing toward the floor. "It will not work. But maybe he is right about one thing. You deserve someone who can give you more than I can." She shook her head. "You do not understand. You are the first person who sees me as something more than a burden. I cannot just let that go." Ethan looked at her, his jaw tightening. "Emma, you are not a burden, but I cannot be the reason you fight your family. I have nothing to offer except my hands and my honesty." She smiled sadly. "Then that is already more than what I have known my whole life." Silence fell between them, heavy but full of meaning. He knelt beside her wheelchair, meeting her eyes. "You are making this hard," he said quietly. "Maybe it is supposed to be hard," she replied. "Anything worth feeling always is." Before he could answer, the sound of tires screeched outside. A black car pulled up, and two men in suits stepped out. One of them opened the door for Richard Collins. The older man's expression was cold as steel. He walked straight toward them. "Emma," he said sharply, "get in the car. Now." Ethan stood, his voice calm but firm. "Sir, with all respect, she came here on her own." Richard turned his glare toward him. "Do not speak to me. You think a few kind words can erase the dirt under your nails? You think you can lift her out of her chair like you lift a wrench? Ethan's fists clenched, but he held his ground. No, sir. I think she can lift herself if people stop holding her down. The older man's face turned red with anger. You are finished. By tonight, every supplier and every client you work with will cut ties. You will never turn a wrench in this city again. Emma's voice broke through the tension. Enough. This is my life, not your company to manage. Richard froze, stunned by her defiance. You would throw away everything for this man? She looked at Ethan, then back at her father. I am not throwing anything away. I am choosing for the first time. Richard took a step forward, but Ethan moved slightly in front of her. If you have to blame someone, blame me, Ethan said steadily. But do not punish her for wanting to live. The silence that followed was sharp and painful. Finally, Richard turned away, his voice low with restrained fury. You will regret this. He motioned to his men and walked back to the car. Emma sat still, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Ethan knelt beside her again. You did not have to do that, he said softly. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. I wanted to. In that moment, neither of them knew what would happen next, but for the first time, they both felt free. For the next several days, the air around the Collins mansion felt colder than usual. Richard refused to speak to Emma, and the staff moved around her carefully, afraid to get caught in the quiet storm brewing between father and daughter. Emma spent most of her time in her room, staring out the window, wondering if she had made things worse for Ethan. She had stood up for him, but at what cost? Her father's power was vast, and she knew his threats were never empty. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan's garage was unusually silent. One by one, his regular customers called to cancel their appointments. Contracts he had with larger companies were suddenly terminated without explanation. Within 3 days, half his business was gone. His co-workers looked to him for answers, but Ethan only shook his head. We will figure it out, he said quietly, though deep down, he already knew what had happened. That night, he sat alone in the dim light of the workshop, staring at his tools, thinking about his mother's hospital bills and how easily one man's influence could destroy everything he had built. But when he thought of Emma, her courage, her defiance, the way she had looked at him when she said she wanted to choose something inside him, refused to give up, he would not let her fight alone. The next morning, Ethan drove to the rehabilitation center where he knew Emma trained. When she saw him at the door, her face lit up with surprise. Ethan, she said, wheeling toward him, what are you doing here? He smiled faintly. Checking on a friend. She noticed the tiredness in his eyes. He did it, did he not? My father ruined your contracts. Ethan nodded slowly but tried to keep his tone light. It is all right. I have lost jobs before. She looked at him with guilt. This is my fault. No, he said firmly. This is not on you. He is doing what he knows best control. But I will survive, Emma. I always do. She reached out, touching his hand. You should not have to survive because of me. He looked at her and said softly, You are the reason I remember what dignity feels like. That is not something I will ever regret. Her throat tightened. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan said, You keep fighting for your steps, and I will keep fighting for my work. Deal? She smiled faintly. Deal. They both laughed quietly, as if the world outside no longer existed. But destiny was not done testing them yet. Later that week, Richard called a press conference at his company headquarters. In front of the cameras, he announced a new expansion project, using the opportunity to emphasize the importance of integrity in personal and professional relationships. It was a public message disguised as business talk, but Emma understood it instantly. He was using the media to humiliate her, to remind everyone that she was a Collins and that her choices had consequences. Watching the broadcast, Ethan clenched his fists. He had stayed quiet long enough. The next morning, he walked into the Collins headquarters carrying a folder. The security guards tried to stop him, but he calmly handed them a letter addressed to Richard. Inside it said, You can take my contracts, but not my character. I will rebuild from nothing, just as you once did. And when I do, it will be without stepping on anyone's dignity. That letter would later make its way to Emma's hands. When she read it, tears welled up in her eyes. She realized Ethan's strength was not in what he owned, but in what he refused to compromise. That night, she wheeled herself to the practice room, stood with the help of the railings, and whispered his name as she tried to take her first step in years. Her legs trembled, pain shot through her body, but she did not stop. If he can fight, she whispered. "So can I." And for the first time, her right foot moved forward. Weeks turned into months, and life quietly shifted for both Ethan and Emma. Ethan worked tirelessly to rebuild what he had lost. He rented a smaller garage at the edge of town, fixing cars for loyal customers who still believed in his honesty and skill. It was not much, but it was his, and every engine he repaired was a small step toward dignity. At night, when the world fell silent, he often thought about Emma, wondering how she was doing, wondering if she still remembered him. Meanwhile, Emma's world was changing too. The day she managed to move her right foot, she cried not from pain but from hope. Her therapist called it progress, but she called it a promise. Every morning she returned to the practice room, gripping the railings with determination. Her arms trembled, her muscles ached, yet she kept going. In her mind, she replayed Ethan's words again and again. "You keep fighting for your steps, and I will keep fighting for my work." She whispered those words like a prayer. Her father noticed the change in her. She seemed stronger, more determined, no longer the quiet, obedient daughter he once controlled. At first, he was proud. But when he realized that Ethan was the reason behind her transformation, pride turned to bitterness. One evening, as Emma practiced, Richard entered the room. "You should not exhaust yourself," he said. "You are overdoing it." She did not stop moving. "Overdoing it?" she replied through heavy breaths. "You call walking overdoing it?" Richard sighed, his voice softer now. "Emma, you are angry at me, I understand, but this obsession with that man will only hurt you." She turned to face him, gripping the railing tightly. "It already did hurt me, Father. It hurt when you made me believe I was broken. It hurt when you tried to buy his silence. But I am done letting pain control me." Richard stood frozen. For the first time, he saw not his fragile daughter, but a woman with fire in her eyes. Later that week, Emma attended a charity gala her father hosted. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and the room was filled with familiar faces from the city's elite. She sat quietly near the front, her wheelchair polished and elegant, her expression calm but distant. When the event ended, she asked her father to let her speak privately to the crowd. Hesitant but curious, he agreed. Emma wheeled herself to the stage, microphone in hand. "Most of you know me as Richard Collins's daughter," she began, her voice steady. "You see the chair, the last name, the privilege. But none of that defines strength. Strength is not what you inherit. It is what you rebuild after you have lost everything." The crowd fell silent. Richard's expression softened with surprise. "There was a man," Emma continued, "a mechanic who taught me that dignity does not come from money or power. It comes from honesty, from standing tall, even when the world tries to push you down." Murmurs filled the room. She smiled faintly. "I do not know if he is here tonight, but I hope he knows that because of him, I am learning to walk again." Across town, Ethan was watching the speech on television from his small garage. The sound was low, but her words hit him like thunder. He turned off the screen and sat in silence for a moment, overwhelmed by pride and something deeper love. He looked at his mother, who was resting nearby, and whispered, "She is walking, Mom." Tears filled his eyes. That night, Emma left the gala early, escaping the cameras and whispers. As her driver pulled up to the mansion gate, she looked out the window at the quiet city lights and smiled. She knew their story was not over yet. Somewhere out there, the man who had reminded her how to fight was still building his own path, and when the time was right, their roads would meet again. Several months later, the world had changed quietly for both Ethan and Emma. The city had moved on, the press had found new stories, and Richard Collins's company continued to grow as if nothing had ever happened. But within the silence of ordinary days, two lives were still reaching toward each other, connected by something neither money nor power could erase. Ethan's small garage had begun to recover. Word of his honesty and craftsmanship had spread through town, bringing him loyal clients who appreciated hard work more than reputation. He never mentioned the Collins name again, not out of bitterness, but out of peace. His life was simple: wake early, fix cars, take care of his mother, and watch the sun set over the hills. Yet every night, when the world grew quiet, his mind wandered back to her. He often wondered if Emma had taken another step, if she was still fighting the way she always had. One morning, as Ethan was sweeping the floor of the garage, a soft sound caught his attention, the hum of an engine, gentle and familiar. He turned around and froze. A restored vintage car rolled to a stop just outside the garage. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out carefully, leaning slightly on a cane. The sunlight caught her hair, and for a moment he thought he was dreaming. It was Emma. She stood by the car, her expression calm, a mix of pride and nervous joy. "You fixed this car for me once," she said softly. Ethan's voice caught in his throat. "You are walking," he whispered. She smiled. "I am trying. Some days are harder than others, but I keep going. You told me to fight, remember?" Ethan walked toward her slowly, afraid that if he blinked, she might disappear. "You did more than fight," he said quietly. "You proved them all wrong." Emma took another step forward, her balance steady but fragile. "I did not do it to prove anything," she said. "I did it because I wanted to stand on my own when I saw you again." His heart swelled with emotion. He had seen many miracles in his life machines brought back to life, engines that roared again after years of silence, but nothing compared to this. She looked around the garage, her gaze softening. "It has changed," she said. "It is smaller, but it feels more alive." He smiled faintly. "Like me." They both laughed quietly, the sound filled with relief and something deeper understanding. Then Emma reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "This is from my father," she said. "He wanted me to give it to you." Ethan hesitated before taking it. The paper was thick, the handwriting neat and deliberate. It said only one line: "A man's worth is not measured by his wealth, but by what he gives others to believe in." Ethan looked up, stunned. Emma nodded gently. "He saw your letter. It changed something in him. He will not admit it, but it did." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said softly, "I am not sure what to say." "Then do not," Emma replied. "Just keep being who you are." She reached for his hand, and he took it, feeling the warmth of her fingers steady, alive, strong. The world outside was quiet, only the soft wind moving through the open door. In that stillness, two souls that had fought through pride, pain, and distance finally stood side by side. "You know," she said playfully, "if I had not sat at the wrong table that night, I would have never met you." Ethan smiled, eyes glistening. "Maybe it was not the wrong table," he said. "Maybe it was the right one all along." She laughed, leaning lightly on him as they stood together by the car. The camera of life seemed to pull back at that moment the mechanic and the woman who once could not walk, standing in the soft golden light of the afternoon. And just before the scene faded, her voice could be heard, calm and full of hope. "Sometimes the mistakes we make are just destiny in disguise."